In 1961, a young Ukrainian lawyer stood in a Soviet courtroom and was sentenced to death. His crime? Believing that Ukraine should be free. That man was Levko Lukianenko. His life is not just a story of imprisonment and persecution. It is a story about how one man's unwavering commitment to democracy helped shape the future of an entire nation. Levko Lukianenko was a Ukrainian political dissident, human rights activist, and later a statesman. He is best known as the principal author of Ukraine's 1991 Declaration of Independence, the document that marked the official end of Soviet rule in Ukraine. But long before he wrote the words that made Ukraine independent, he nearly lost his life for imagining that independence in the first place. To understand why that vision mattered so deeply, it is important to understand Ukraine's experience under Soviet rule. In the early 1930s, under the regime of Joseph Stalin, Ukraine endured the Holodomor, the terror famine, which devastated Ukraine from 1932 to 1933. As part of forced collectivization, the Soviet government seized grain from Ukrainian farmers and sealed the borders, preventing starving people from leaving in search of food. Millions of Ukrainians died. The famine was not a natural disaster, but the result of deliberate political decisions made in Moscow. For many Ukrainians, it became a defining national trauma and a lasting reminder that Soviet rule could bring suffering rather than security. Decades later, in 1986, another crisis deepened that mistrust. The explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exposed profound failures within the Soviet system. Authorities delayed public warnings and minimized the scale of the radiation release. The catastrophe became not only an environmental tragedy, but also a symbol of secrecy, negligence, and misrule. For many Americans, these disasters may feel like distant history, but for Ukrainians, they remain ingrained in the nation's collective identity, a powerful reminder that Soviet rule too often brought repression, suffering, and disregard for human life. By the late 1950s, Ukraine was held tightly in the Soviet Union's grip. To speak openly about independence wasn't simply unpopular, it was dangerous. Lukianenko helped found underground organizations that advocated for Ukrainian self-determination. These were not violent movements. They were grounded in political debate and legal reasoning. They argued that Ukraine had the right to govern itself. The Soviet government disagreed. In 1961, Lukianenko was arrested for anti-Soviet agitation and was sentenced to death. The sentence would later be reduced to 15 years in prison and in labor camps, but imprisonment would define much of his adult life. Across multiple arrests, Lukianenko spent almost 27 years in prisons, labor camps, and internal exile. For many, that would have been enough to give up, enough to walk away. But imprisonment did not silence Lukianenko. It sharpened him. After his release, he helped establish the Ukrainian Helsinki Group, which monitored Soviet human rights violations and used international agreements to hold the government accountable. The group demanded basic human rights, freedom of speech, political participation, and dignity. For this, he was arrested yet again. Despite enduring decades of repression, Lukianenko remained committed to peaceful resistance. He believed that independence meant little without democracy. For him, sovereignty had to be grounded in human rights and political pluralism. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was in visible decline. Prolonged Cold War competition with the West, structural economic weaknesses, and political stagnation had undermined the authority of the central government. Meanwhile, new reform policies introduced limited openness and transparency, loosening the rigid controls that had defined Soviet life for decades. As restrictions eased, former dissidents were able to return to public life and organize more openly. In this shifting political climate, Lukianenko re-emerged as a central figure in Ukraine's growing independence movement. He became a leader in the Rukh, the People's Movement of Ukraine, a broad coalition that united democratic reformers and pro-independence activists across the country. Then came 1991. Lukianenko drafted the Declaration of Independence of Ukraine, the very document that would formally establish Ukraine as an independent state. When Parliament adopted it, and when the Ukrainian people overwhelmingly approved it in a national referendum, Soviet authority over Ukraine officially ended. The man once condemned for imagining independence had now written it into law. After independence, Lukianenko continued to serve his country. He was elected to Ukraine's parliament and later became Ukraine's first ambassador to Canada, helping secure international recognition for the new state. Though Lukianenko never sought prominence, he was widely respected as a moral authority and as a symbol of steadfast democratic resistance. His legacy is especially important to remember today. As Ukraine defends its sovereignty against renewed Russian aggression, Lukianenko's lifelong belief in national self-determination resonates more clearly than ever. Ukraine's pursuit of freedom did not begin in 2022, but grows out of decades of resistance, sacrifice, and enduring hope. Lukianenko's own experience, from imprisonment for advocating sovereignty to later helping draft the Declaration of Independence, reflects that longer trajectory. Levko Lukianenko understood, in a way many around him did not, that independence is not a single moment in history. It is a responsibility, one that must be defended, reinforced, and firmly anchored in democratic values.